So a couple weeks back, I did a mailbag video which was requested from a few subscribers, and I've had a couple people ask me ever since then if I'll start doing mailbags on a particular cadence. And although I haven't decided on that quite yet, I may have it be a monthly thing, maybe the first Friday of every month, even though I know today is not the first Friday of the month. But either way, I thought I'd do another mailbag since some of you have been asking about it. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Before I get into today's question, since no one won the last time around in predicting the outcome of the Bulls game against the Wizards for a chance to win the $100 gift card from myself, we're going to go ahead and retry it for tonight's game against the Clippers, and hopefully we'll get a winner this time around. So if you're new to the channel, or if you haven't seen my previous announcements on giveaways, which I try to do often on the channel, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of those. But all you have to do is predict the score of tonight's game in the following format, the total score for each team, so that it's clear and it's not up for interpretation. And guys, I know it's a Bulls channel, but you did not have to predict the Bulls winning on this one. I will not pass any judgment. I may have if you did against the Wizards, but you ended up being right if you did anyway. So leave your prediction in the comments for the score of tonight's game, and if you get the score exactly right, I'll be sending you a gift card of $100, and I believe the last vote for what gift card you guys wanted was from Amazon rather than the NBAstore.com, so the winner will get a $100 gift card to Amazon. Okay, but now that we got that out of the way, let's dive into some of your guys' questions, and I'll try to move on these rather quickly so I can get to as many questions as possible without making the video too long, especially since I've already rambled on enough already. So the first question comes to us from Shravan. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and they ask, what do you think the current ceiling of this team is? Would we need to trade or sign bigger names to contend for a championship, or just develop the current roster? Wow, so this is actually a great question. So I'm assuming when you say current ceiling of the roster, it doesn't necessarily mean their current ceiling for this season, because if that's the case, I would say the Bulls' ceiling with this lineup for this season is likely a 7 or 8 seed. And it's mainly because they're really young and still developing. However, I think what you're asking is, what's the current ceiling of this roster going forward if we were to keep all of these guys, develop them and build around them, and without making any drastic changes, what would be their ceiling in the next few seasons, and whether they would be a championship contending team? I mean, this one is a tough one because so many assumptions have to be made. Is Zach Lavine going to get better than he already is and truly turn into that superstar and franchise player we're hoping he becomes? Is Patrick Williams going to break out and be an all-star in the next couple of seasons? Is Lauri Markkanen going to continue to develop his game and get even better and more dynamic than just being known as being a shooter on offense, and also stay healthy? Same goes for Wendell Carter Jr. Is Coby White finally going to start playing consistently well and developing into that true point guard that we need him to be? But let's put the pie in the sky assumptions aside and consider realistic assumptions at this point, based on what we know and the potential of this roster. No, I don't think that we would be a championship contending team. We would need to bring in at least one big name or better complementary pieces than what we have today. Because the challenge for the Bulls right now is some of these guys don't fit well in terms of their positions and where they're best suited to play. Coby White, as an example, as much as potential that he has, I don't know if he's ever going to develop into that point guard we need him to be, that floor general, that facilitator. And then Wendell, he's played decently as a center, but the Bulls need someone who is positioned well to guard other starting centers, big physical starting centers in the league, while also being a strong force in the paint on offense. So again, as far as your question, what do I think is the team ceiling? Again, if it's not just for this year, but if we continue to develop the current guys we have and not make any moves, I honestly would say their ceiling is probably a 4 or a 5 seed in the East. I know it might sound a bit harsh, but the Bulls are going to need some quality star talent to build around in order for them to be considered title contenders. Next up, we've got Y Strum. He says, hearing lots of trade rumors to get Lonzo to the Bulls. He possesses two skills that the Bulls need the most, which would be playmaking and defense. You have stated that you're not the biggest Lonzo fan, but how would he fit with the Bulls? So yes, you're correct. I am not a big Lonzo fan. I honestly never really have. I actually thought he had a lot of promise coming out of college and thought he could actually be something special. But he's really disappointed thus far in his NBA career, and I also just don't see him wanting to get better. He just looks really disinterested and not engaged a lot of times on the court, and that's one thing I appreciate about Coby White, is because despite his flaws, he has a very strong work ethic and is energized on the court. Now, you are right, Lonzo does have the skills the Bulls desperately need right now in playmaking and defense, although I would argue his playmaking has been pretty subpar this season. I mean, most people criticize Coby for his lack of playmaking, but Lonzo is actually averaging less assists per game than Coby White is, and Coby's only averaging 5.4 assists per game. So it's not like Lonzo is excelling in that department. He is definitely a better defender, especially on the perimeter, than Coby is. Now, I will say Lonzo was making a case for himself for the Bulls the other night when we played the Pelicans, but I think the issue with Lonzo Ball, and it's similar to Coby, is his consistency. Sometimes he goes through moments of great play, and sometimes he just doesn't look like he belongs in the NBA even. What I will say is if the Bulls can make a steal of a trade for him, then sure, I mean, he would help in a lot of aspects that the Bulls are really deficient in, particularly on defense. But my concern is I think the league overvalues him to an extent, and we would likely have to give up too much for him via a trade. And I've mentioned this before, but even if we do acquire him via a trade, he's still going to be a restricted free agent in the offseason, so it's not guaranteed the Bulls will be able to retain him, and then you've traded away assets for him for nothing. As for your question on how he fits with the Bulls roster, well, let's say, we somehow are able to get him without trading any of the starting lineup, meaning you're able to trade him for some of our key bench players or draft picks. In my view, he would have to start as the point guard, because although I think Coby is a better overall player, Lonzo is a better point guard. So Coby would have to come off the bench as the sixth man, being a combo guard and playing backup minutes for both Lonzo and Lavine in this instance, and the rest of the starting lineup you kind of keep in place. So Lonzo would then be the floor general for that starting unit, which we would need. He would complement Lavine nicely in feeding him, and as well as Lowry for that matter, for scoring. And then this also allows the Bulls to not be as deficient on defense in the backcourt. But again, a lot of it depends on how much we have to give up for Lonzo to make it worth it, because although he has the skills the Bulls are lacking right now, I don't consider him to be an above average player, and long term, I just don't know if it positions the Bulls better from where they're at right now and where they would need to be in order to give up assets for him. Okay, wow, I've done 2 questions so far, moving things right along. Next, we have Ricky P. He asks, do you think the Bulls should experiment with Zach at the 1? Last night, I noticed Zach bringing up the ball for us in the 3rd quarter, and the offense looked more fluid. So yeah, Zach has actually been bringing up the ball a lot more, especially down the stretch, because I think Billy Donovan trusts him with the ball in those closeout situations over Coby White. I mean, here's the thing. Zach Lavine is a decent playmaker when he wants to be. And if I'm not mistaken, he actually played a lot of point guard in his rookie season in Minnesota, as well as playing point guard in college, so he's familiar in that type of role. He also continues to improve his passing and general floor IQ every season. I mean, you look at his assist numbers by season, they've continued to get better. He's averaging 5.3 so far this year, which is the best of his career. And when he's playing and acting as a facilitator rather than ISO-heavy plays, the Bulls are more successful on offense and tend to win games when he does. So yes, I do think the Bulls should experiment with Lavine playing the point here and there. And I also think they should experiment with Coby White playing the 2. I would love to see Billy Donovan trying out new rotations and experimenting with the roster and seeing what works. It's a young team, and you have to see where the players are going to develop best. Next up, we've got B Cubs. Do you think Zach deserves a max contract extension next year? And has he convinced you he's a franchise player yet? So I'll answer the first part of this question, and it'll tie into the second. Does Lavine deserve a max contract? Here's the thing. There are so many players throughout NBA history who got max contracts that, quite frankly, didn't deserve it because of the way the market was at any given time, or teams were kind of forced to hand out massive contracts to great players, but not superstar level players, just so they could maintain their roster. I'm talking about guys like Mike Conley, Gordon Hayward. I mean, even I think Chandler Parsons was handed a max contract at one point. Now, I might be a bit old school in this thinking, but in my opinion, max contracts should be reserved for superstar level players, right? You allocate most of your salary cap space to franchise level players, franchise changing players. But the fact of the matter is that that's not how the NBA always works. A lot of players who will be forgotten 10 to 15 years from now have received max contracts. I'm not saying Zach is one of those types of players, but rather based on the current NBA market and some other players who are getting max deals who aren't really even putting up the kind of numbers Zach is, then yes, I do think he is worth a max contract extension. I don't know about next year offering that extension because I would rather him just play out his contract, which would end the following season, to really ensure that he's still playing at that high level he is today that would warrant a max contract. Now, am I convinced he's the franchise player for the Bulls? I mean, I'm trying not to be too reactionary because the game he had the other night against the Pelicans was incredible. Yeah, that's the thing about Zach, is he has flashes of superstardom and carrying this team to wins. I would say the only thing is I need to see it on a consistent level of elite play from him, which we honestly have started seeing more recently. I mean, the game against the Wizards was disappointing, in the fact that he missed that tying layup, but sometimes stuff like that happens. But the way he's been playing more recently, being smarter on the court in terms of his shot selection, better playmaking, better court vision, honestly, if he can keep up that consistently for the rest of the season, then yeah, I would say he's there in terms of being that elite type of franchise player. Wow, I'm really bad at moving quickly on these and just rambling on. Let's do one more, and this one is from Yasser Ozark, and they ask, should the Bulls go win now and make major move on a player on free agency or trade, or let things flow naturally and be patient? I don't think the Bulls are in win now mode. I mean, this was really an assessment year, so I don't think the Bulls should make any crazy big moves or making any trades prior to the deadline this season. I do think that would be a bit premature, especially since the team has shown moments of promise and being a strong team for how young they are. But as far as being patient, I mean, we've kind of been patient for some time. I do think it's time to start making some big moves and seeing the return from the initial rebuild that was triggered when we traded Jimmy Butler. I mean, that was almost 4 years ago now. And then, of course, we haven't won a championship or even gone back to the finals, for that matter, since 1998. So Bulls fans, at least myself anyway, I'm kind of tired of being patient and want to see some concrete moves made that actually show progress. Like I said, I don't think that should be mid-season this year, but in the off-season, I would like to see a bit of a shakeup on this roster, unless of course the Bulls go on a tear with this current group and show a massive progress heading into the off-season. And I actually think that we will see this from Arturas. This is his first year on the job. This is Gar Pax's constructed roster for the most part. He's going to want to make this team his own, so I do suspect some significant changes to the roster in the off-season. So I know I didn't get to all of your questions, guys. I guess I'll just have to keep up a cadence for these mailbags to get more at a later time. Thanks for leaving all the questions, though. I do appreciate it. Don't forget to leave your predictions for tonight's score for the game in the comments below for a chance at a $100 gift card to Amazon if you predict it correctly. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and apologies for the super long video. If you stayed for this long, you're awesome, and I really appreciate the support. Enjoy watching the game tonight, and I will catch you guys in the next one.